I'm Ashley.
And I'm Toni, and we're from Period 1, and we're here to present the environmentalist position on the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The idea of environmentalism has been around for about a century, beginning with John Muir, Gifford Pinchot, and Aldo Leopold in the early 1900s, though environmentalist ideas have been around since the 1800s. The preservation and conservation ethics began the ideas of environmentalism. The environmentalist movement began in the 1960s with an emphasis on finding new sources of energy, which has continued to the present. Environmentalism today is a set of values that people hold, and the main theme today is that the earth is finite. We must do what we can to protect it now and for future generations. Environmentalists strive to prevent adverse effects on the natural environment.
The oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico has affected many people and businesses, including environmentalists and property owners. The 1 million gallons of oil released per day flows into the Gulf, which in turn affects the marine wildlife and plant life, predators of the wildlife, and marine reserves, which is part of the environmentalist concern. This oil also affects beach tourism that could change business negatively on the beach and surrounding areas.
Currently, the oil blowout has many impacts. Economically, an estimated $1,250 million have been lost from various companies, which range from BP, fishing, and tourism. Tourism is impacted because on the nearby beaches to the Gulf, tar balls and other oil products are appearing, could have hazardous impacts on human health. The oil blowout has currently affected 120 miles of coastline. Animal and plant life are deeply affected, both the current and future generations. Animals such as pelicans, fish, hermit crabs, and alligators can be covered in oil, and they have to be caught and washed, or else they can die from the toxins in the oil or from the lack of ability to move in their habitat. Springtime is the worst time for this to happen because it's when these animals reproduce and their offspring could have birth defects or die. Local restaurants that only serve fresh-caught local seafood are experiencing a decline in business because the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration banned fishing in the Gulf.
The blowout will continue to impact the world in the future. Property values near the beaches affected by the oil will decrease because no one will want to visit the beaches if there's oil covering the sand. Consequently, tourism will decline because the beaches will be unpleasant and unhealthy, so less people will want to visit. Because of the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico, the oil will flow with the water to the Florida Keys and then into the Atlantic Ocean, where it will eventually disperse. This will most likely occur in the next 100 days. Toxins from the leaked oil could be dangerous to the wetlands and the Everglades because the marshes hold on to these toxins. This will cause an increase in floral and fauna affected by the oil and most likely an increase in the death of these species. Currently, there are 792 dead animals collected, and this number is expected to surpass the tens of thousands of animals collected after the Exxon Valdez spill.
BP is estimating that they will stop the leak from the oil rig by August, but numerous wetlands, beaches, and marshes won't be completely cleaned up until many years later.
There's a lot of important issues to talk about in the headlines this weekend, especially the oil spill off the coast of Louisiana and Mississippi. Please welcome our environmental chemist, Jesse Short of Oceana and University of New Orleans marsh ecologist Denise Reed. Welcome, ladies, welcome. Okay. What do you say is the primary concern for this spring oil spill?
Well, spring is an especially bad time for an oil spill because of annual reproductive cycle is beginning for all species. Embryonic and juvenile life stages are most sensitive to oil.
I'm very concerned with the spring storms and summer hurricanes. They could aggravate oil's intrusion into coastal areas.
Could you explain how this works?
Let's say we get a small tropical system developing in the Gulf. A storm that's not serious, but such events raise the water level all along the coast as an assault by waves, driven by perhaps 40 miles per hour intermittent winds, pushes water in. Instead of a few inches of water at the feet of wetland grasses, the whole marsh would flood, leaving the grasses covered with water for days. And that allows oil to ride over the marsh and further inland. However, ordinarily, the warmth of the Gulf and the teeming life within marsh soils will work to degrade oil, so sometimes doing nothing is a very viable solution, because tramping to remove oil would cause more harm than leaving the marsh to clean itself.
Unless there is too much oil, the decomposition of organic matter, the crude oil, can cause degrading microorganisms to use up all of the oxygen. This would smother most sediment-dwelling organisms. The oxygen deprivation would then halt almost all oil degradation, which explains why coastal oiling can be so persistent. Indeed, in marshy areas, trapped oil can last up to a decade or more.
The thing is, Hurricanes may be devastating, but they're a natural part of the system dynamic down here, so the environment has learned how to recover from them. But oil is a kind of insult that is not something that these systems have seen before, certainly not on this scale. So their ability to cope with it has to be questioned.
So how far do you think the oil could spread?
In the Gulf of Mexico, there is a strong, swift ocean current that looks like an upside-down U. It leaves the Gulf through the Florida Straits. It passes the Keys, Cuba, and the Bahamas, eventually joining the Gulf Stream, which brings warmer waters to the east coast and Newfoundland before veering eastward for northern Europe. Eventually, the oil could get caught up in the loop and be carried around Florida and to the Atlantic, although the oil will most likely disperse and dissolve by the time it reaches further into the Atlantic.
Small currents called filaments also spin off from the main currents and reach farther northward. This could push oil closer to the coast or pull it back to the loop current and set it heading toward the Atlantic. So how far the oil spreads is unknown.
Yeah, and the thing is about the loop is that the current is always there, unlike other currents which move in response to wind. So if there's no wind, there's no current. When oil gets in the loop, oil will move very swiftly to the south and toward the southern portion of Florida.
So are you basically saying that if the oil gets into the loop, it will just spread and cause a bigger mess?
Exactly. The Florida coast has corals and other sensitive environments along the coast, along with other marine life. The wildlife could be hurt by the incoming oil through the loop and into the Gulf Stream in the ocean. This will also make it more difficult to control.
How long do you think it will take to stop this big oil spill?
Currently, BP has a cap on the blowout preventer on the oil rig that was installed on June 3rd. From June 3rd to June 5th, the volume of oil collected was 16,600 barrels, and 32.7 million standard cubic feet of natural gas was flared. It only collects about a third of the oil leaking out per day, so about 2/3 of the oil, the majority, is still back into the ocean. Within the next month, they're working to replace the current cap with a larger one that is supposed to collect more oil. According to Coast Guard Admiral Tad Allen, the oil will stop flowing by August.
How long will it take to clean up beaches, wildlife areas, and marine reserves?
BP has positioned rapid response teams in Alabama and Louisiana to enable quick response and cleaning of areas where oil may be ashore. These 12-person teams will assess initial impacts and then call in a larger contingent of trained responders and volunteers to clean the affected area. These groups are continually picking up clumps of oil on the beaches and using technology to skim off any oil that comes ashore.
This is expected to take several years. More than 20 years after the Exxon Valdez foundered off the coast of Alaska, puddles of oil can still be found in the Prince William Sound. If the oil gets into the marshes, the toxins will stay there for a really long time. Many people right now are doing whatever they can to clean up animals and beaches as well as protecting themselves.
Is it possible for the oil to just clean up itself?
No, but once the oil reaches the surface, it begins to evaporate, losing much as 20 to 40% of the original hydrocarbons, which is obviously good. It selectively removes a lot of compounds we'd rather not have in the water, like PAHs and a frothy mix of hydrocarbons and water, also known as tar balls. But we still need the help of individuals and organizations to help control and clean up the oil.
Has the oil spill personally affected you?
I believe that this is the worst disaster environmentally because it affects so many habitats and organisms and affects so many people on the coast negatively. Millions of dollars have also been lost in efforts to save the Gulf and its wildlife.
Thank you for coming on and talking about this.